The brutal murder of Laken Riley was foreordained the day that Joe Biden took office and reversed the successful Trump policies that had finally secured our borders. We don't know how many terrorists and violent criminals are among them, and worse, the Democrats don't seem to care. One of these criminals has now been convicted of the brutal murder of Laken Riley. How many such monsters have the Democrats deliberately allowed into our country? We do not know. But we are slowly, painfully, and tragically finding out, victim by victim. Just months before Laken Riley's murder, this murderer was arrested for theft, but he was released, and ICE did not take him into custody because of a Biden administration policy that shields many criminal aliens from arrest and deportation. Sadly, this is exactly what those who voted for Joe Biden in 2020 voted for, because this is exactly what the Democrats promised to do.
As expected, the Republicans are wasting no time in exerting their control over our government by taking a vote on the Laken Riley Act, a hardline anti-immigrant bill that gives ICE, acting under the Department of Homeland Security, even more authority to detain undocumented immigrants than they already have.
The Laken Riley Act would require ICE detention for illegal aliens who are charged with, arrested for, or convicted of any burglary, theft, larceny, or shoplifting offense. H.R. 29 further requires the Department of Homeland Security to issue a detainer for those illegal aliens and take custody of them effectively and expeditiously. It would also allow states to bring a civil action against derelict federal officials who refuse to enforce these laws. Joe Biden and Alejandro Mayorkas, I'm looking at you. But without this law, a future Democratic president could once again release dangerous illegal aliens back onto our streets to prey on our people and destroy innocent young lives like Laken Riley. This bill will stop them.
I find it incredibly disgusting, appalling, reprehensible, but also very predictable and on brand that the Republicans have hijacked the tragic murder of Laken Riley to push a sweeping, draconian bill for low-level crimes like shoplifting, burglary, theft, and larceny. We know what type of time they are on, but it doesn't make it any easier to swallow when they act out things in this manner. And it's really not a complicated matter on why Republicans are motivated to do this. One of them being that they want to demonize immigrants. Another aspect that they're trying to hit home is that they want to justify anti-immigrant bigotry. They clearly despise immigrants and do not want them to be a part of the fabric of our community, of our society in America. They are trying desperately to make sure that white supremacy stays in this country and it thrives, not just survives, but thrives. But Representative Jimmy Raskin, as usual, did not let Republicans hide behind their fake concerns and sympathy for their constituents.
Their bill today is an empty and opportunistic measure. It's not like the compromise they tanked in the last Congress, a bill for greater border security, or for better technology in the ports of entry, or for expanding legal pathways to immigration and citizenship for millions of people, or for addressing huge immigrant visa backlogs. No. This bill would upend 28 years of mandatory immigration detention policy by requiring that any undocumented immigrant arrested for theft, larceny, or shoplifting be detained even if they are never convicted or even charged with a crime. This is a radical departure from current law, which since 1996 has generally required mandatory detention only for persons who are criminally convicted or who admit to having committed certain serious crimes. That is, when criminal guilt is certain and established beyond a reasonable doubt. Under this bill, a person who's lived in the United States for decades, say for most of her life, paid taxes and bought a home, but who was mistakenly arrested for shoplifting, would not be freed to resume her life, but rather would be detained and deported even if the charges are dropped and even if the police admit that the arrest was mistaken. Consider a young dreamer or TPS recipient who's with a group of friends after school and someone in the group shoplifts, stealing a candy bar. To scare the whole group straight, everyone's arrested, whether they were involved in the shoplifting or not. But nobody is charged, and the charges are dropped. For most of the kids, it's a humiliating afternoon and a valuable life lesson. But for one of them, a young person who's been in America lawfully for years with his or her family, the consequences would be devastating under this legislation. Mandatory detention and deportation from the country just for having been arrested, even if never charged. It seems to me passing strange, Mr. Speaker, that our friends are taking this position when they do not even believe that the criminal justice system can be trusted when a jury unanimously convicts someone who's had the best legal representation money can buy in the state of New York on 34 different felony criminal counts after an extended criminal trial with all due process protections, including cross-examination and the right to counsel being afforded. If the criminal justice process cannot be trusted to identify a truly guilty person, even when that person has been arrested, charged, indicted, prosecuted, represented at every stage, given an opportunity to cross-examine all witnesses and to testify personally, and then is unanimously convicted by a jury of his peers beyond a reasonable doubt, how can the criminal justice process be trusted to identify a truly guilty person just with an arrest and no indictment, no prosecution, no cross-examination, no neutral adjudication by an impartial judge, no fact-finding, and no criminal conviction by a 12-person jury beyond a reasonable doubt? Mandatory detention has always been reserved for people who are convicted of crimes and actually commit crimes. Expanding the detention requirement to include every person who's merely been accused of or arrested for, even if not charged for, shoplifting, for example, collapses the distinction between actual conviction on serious offenses versus simply being charged with or arrested for something very minor, even if the charges don't even lead anywhere.
They couldn't care less about law and order or legitimately reforming our immigration system, because the real intention of this bill is to strike fear into undocumented immigrants already living here and contributing to our country, in addition to disincentivizing anyone from entering our country illegally, regardless of whether the entry was legally and morally justifiable or not. And like clockwork, ultra-wealthy capital owners fall in line with fascists in power because both groups share the same material interests.
Moreover, the murder rate is way down in America. Unlawful immigration at the southern border is now below where it was when Donald Trump left office 4 years ago. And the roaring stock market, which is what Trump and his billionaire entourage care about, just completed its strongest 2 years in a quarter century. Now it's time to make sure all Americans enjoy the benefits of this astonishing economic growth. We should be coming together today to increase the minimum wage, to lift children out of poverty, and to strengthen unions, Social Security, Medicare, and the middle class. But Donald Trump is instead assembling a billionaire cabinet from the top 0.00003% of the wealthiest Americans, drawing the top tier of his new administration from poolside cocktail hour at Mar-a-Lago, and setting up the broligarchs and the plutocrats to plunder an even larger share of government contracts and public resources.
This is what it's all about for Trump and his billionaire oligarch buddies like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Ellison, and others, siphoning as much wealth as possible out of the middle and working classes directly into their pockets. And we are the ones stuck footing the bill.
Trump campaigned on the seductive promise of bringing down the high post-COVID-19 prices for rent, groceries, consumer goods, and healthcare. But now he's preparing to give power over the economy to his team of globe-trotting, dictator-dealing CEOs and billionaires, the very people responsible for exploiting the pandemic to increase prices in the first place. I doubt the billionaire oligarchs have any interest in bringing down the cost of living for the working middle class in America. Pick a crime, paste into it a template immigration law covering convicted criminals, and then require detention or deportation of certain persons merely accused of committing the crime or arrested for committing the crime. No due process required at all. This allows us to get up and demonize immigrants without doing anything to fix the immigration system, and to act tough without actually making America safer or solving any of the problems within the immigration laws.
The House passed this bill for a second time because there was enough Democratic support. And that just shows you that there are people in the Democratic Party who feel the same way as the Republicans who are demonizing immigrants and justifying their anti-immigrant views. And now, when it's moving on to the Senate, Republicans only need another 6 votes. And I'm sure they'll get, I honestly believe, sadly, that there will be 6 Democrats who vote the same way, and we will have this bill. And it is going to be a mess because of the Trump administration and how they view immigrants. And it's really not about protecting our citizens at all. There's a whole bunch of fear-mongering. Because let's be real, if we're talking about making sure people are going to be protected, what about all these white shooters, right? We see all these white shooters, mass shootings, but there are no bills to ban white you know what I'm saying? So, yeah, it's going to be a mess. Rebel HQ, I'm Chris Williamson. We'll see you next time.